Michael R. Pompeo has devoted a lifetime to service, from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, where he graduated first in his class, to serving in West Germany and patrolling the wall, to serving in Congress, as CIA chief, and as Secretary of State from April 2018 to January 2021. He is currently a distinguished fellow at the Hudson Institute, where his work focuses on promoting U.S. national security, technological leadership, and global engagement. It was Secretary Pompeo's idea to create the Commission on Unalienable Rights for the purpose of grounding U.S. foreign policy on our founding principles. Under his leadership, America became a massive energy exporter and a force for good in the Middle East, with real peace cemented in the Abraham Accords. Yes. Secretary Pompeo's time at the State Department marked the end of naive engagement with the Chinese Communist Party, pulling back the curtain, shielding the egregious acts of the CCP that threaten American jobs and freedoms. Mr. Pompeo's religious beliefs ground him and give him a clear moral compass. He kept an open Bible on his desk in his private office at the State Department and read it every day. His work ethic while serving as Secretary of State was legendary, working from dawn to midnight on behalf of the American people every day. Following his remarks this evening, Secretary Pompeo will be joined on stage by Mary Kissel, who served as senior advisor to Mr. Pompeo during his tenure as Secretary of State. Mary is currently Executive Vice President and Senior Policy Advisor at Stevens, Inc., and previously had a long and distinguished career at the Wall Street Journal, where she was a member of the editorial board. Mary has been a favorite speaker at several past Steamboat Institute events, and we consider her a special member of our Steamboat Institute family. Yes. Let's give a warm Rocky Mountain welcome to a true American patriot and leader, Michael R. Pompeo.
Thank you.
Sir,
Thank
such
you.
a pleasure.
Bless you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you all for that gracious welcome. You know, the stage is leaning forward a little bit. I always tell people to lean in, but here we go. What a glorious evening. Thank you all for joining me here tonight. It's an incredible privilege to be with a group that's done so much good for America, and some people who have cared so much about our country for so long and are still hard at it in the fight. For 4 years, I served in the Trump administration, and my wife would always tell me, thank you, I got one, there you go. So for 4 years, my wife would always see me on TV, and she'd say, you know, you need to smile more. And I would remind her that, you know, these were tough topics, and the people asking questions, generally speaking, did not like me. But the good news for you tonight is I'm now an unemployed former diplomat, and so you get Mike Pompeo unplugged. And so I hope we'll get a chance. I know with Mary tonight we'll get a chance to talk about the real things that we worked on for 4 years, and the direction that our country needs to head. I thought I'd start tonight. I had a chance to meet a number of you throughout today, and I thought I'd start with answering the 4 most frequently asked questions of me. Number 1, yes, I read the UFO files, and no, I can't share them with you. It was the same question my son asked me when I got the gig at CIA. Exact same question. Second, Kim Jong-un did not like being called Little Rocket Man. Tonight at the bar, I will tell you how that all went. Third most frequently asked question, yes, I was deeply aware that there were 5 secretaries of defense, 4 national security advisors, and I was barely hanging on some days. And finally, those 4 years were long and there was a lot of pressure, but a whole bunch of you said some very kind things, and I too wish that I was still there today in that place. Jennifer, thanks for your kind introduction. You told me this is one of the biggest crowds you had. I take no credit. Joe Biden gets all the credit. I also want to say to the young people, I had a chance to meet a whole bunch of the folks from the Emerging Leaders Council. You all are doing remarkable work. It was an incredibly diverse group in terms of their capacity to understand America. And you are creating the future Ronald Reagans and Rob Woodsons. So bless you to this institute for doing just that. Look, we'll have some fun tonight, but this is a sobering moment. As I was traveling here, I was changing the front end of what I would share with you tonight because of what we've seen take place these last 2 weeks. And even just yesterday, I still have friends who are on active duty in the military. What we saw happen on August 26th in Kabul did not have to be. And I want to put it in the context of what this institute does, how we think about American leadership and American freedom, and an idea of America as a true leader on the global stage, and importantly, how we preserve those freedoms for us here at home. It was indeed our administration that talked every day and always about America first, and had a realistic understanding of the capacity of the United States of America and how to execute that. I heard a number of you tonight. I could see some of you were very upset about these events and many of you angry. You should know that's a righteous anger at what is taking place in Afghanistan today. Look, you all know this. You get it. America is an exceptional place. And earlier, Carrie, you talked about the fact that there are fewer people who believe America is exceptional. I must say it's a little bit worse than that, I fear. Some of the people who think America is exceptional today think that America is exceptionally evil, and that America is exceptional because it was founded on a set of principles that were racist, and that our Constitution was founded by men who were exceptionally poor in how they framed out our nation and our nation's history. I must tell you, and I'll talk about this for a moment tonight, I served abroad. I was working on the problem sets across the world. I literally got up every day as I came up the elevator, if I was in Washington or if I was somewhere around the world, and my first thought of the day was about my commitment to my faith, but my second thought was my commitment to the young men and women who were serving around the world. Because I knew if I got it wrong, if my team couldn't deliver effective American diplomacy on behalf of President Trump and on behalf of each of you, then some young kid from someplace might have to go do something really hard and really dangerous someday. And I was determined to make sure that happened just as seldom as possible. I also want to talk about the connection between the work that you all do, thinking about the problem set here at home, and the work that I did abroad. I must say, I also get asked all the time, what's the greatest threat to the Republic? Is it Chairman Kim in China? Is it Vladimir Putin in Russia? Is it the threat of terrorism from radical Islamists? I will tell you the greatest threat to the United States of America is our failure to educate the next generation of Americans. There's almost no doubt about that. Our failing institutions, our failing educational institutions are something that our adversaries are spurring on. They understand that if we get it wrong in our central institutions, in our faith institutions, in our K through 12 schools, in our colleges and universities around America, at our Kiwanis clubs and Moose lodges, at institutes like this one, if we refuse to stand up and defend the values that we all know to be central to our nation, then no Secretary of State, not the 71st, not the 79th, has a prayer of securing the freedoms that matter so much to each and every one of us. Our educational institutions are under attack, and each of you has a responsibility to find a place to go fight against what they're trying to do. And I'll talk about that as I close tonight. You should know, too, that as President Trump and I thought about the problem in South Central Asia and Afghanistan, we began with a broader understanding. It was a broader understanding that we needed to make sure we had our resource allocated properly. And so President Trump was absolutely committed. You can go read his Twitter account from 2016 and 2017 and 2018. He was committed to getting our kids back home, to have a smaller footprint in Afghanistan, and he talked often about getting each and every one of them home. I'll never forget, it was my second day as Secretary of State, and he was talking about Afghanistan, and he said, Mike, you got two objectives you need to achieve. First, we got to get them home. We got to get them home as fast as we can. Second, we have to make sure that we reduce the risk that we are ever attacked from that place again. I, of course, knew that there was a tension in those two ideas, but I also believe deeply that America had the capacity to address each of them in a thoughtful, responsible way. And so while the president pushed and wanted us to get back even more quickly than we were able to execute, each time his team came and explained to him why it mattered, why we had to do this in a measured and orderly way, he honored the understandings that we laid out to him. This did not happen in this administration. This administration chose to take the Jenga stack and pull the pin out. I'll never forget, we went from about 15,000 U.S. forces, there were rough equivalent of NATO forces alongside of us, to roughly 8,600 U.S. forces. We then went down to about 4,500. In the middle of this, I was working with the Afghan leaders. I was working with President Ghani, among the most corrupt people I encountered during my 2.5 years as Secretary of State. He has got a lot of his money, your money in his pocket today. I was working with the Taliban, a fellow named Mullah Baradar, bad guy, didn't trust him, neither did the boss. I was working with the Northern Alliance. We were working with the Hazaras in the West. We were working with women's groups, NGOs, who we wanted all to bring to the table. Our mission set was to try and create a process by which Afghans could figure out how to reunite their country so that we wouldn't have another civil war. I knew deeply, I'd read the history. We know that conflicts like this aren't resolved in an hour or day or a week. If you take a look at Colombia, an even simpler problem, it took nearly a decade to convince the government and the various resources and the FARC to come together. We knew we were in for a long run as well, but we were convinced it was a worthy project that would help us reduce American risk, both here at home and for our soldiers who were fighting. We also knew that if we got this wrong, that the threat to the homeland would increase rapidly. And that's what I fear you're going to see in about 96 hours. It didn't have to be this way. We watched the administration violate the most central principles of how one thinks about restructuring a long-time fight, one we've been in now, goodness, just a couple weeks short of 20 years to the day. We knew that it was civilians first out, military last out. They flipped the script. I had big fights in the State Department. We reduced the size of the footprint of our embassy in Kabul significantly in my time. I knew we needed to do that, and I knew, frankly, we could accomplish our diplomatic mission without the enormity of the size of the group that was there before. We also knew that there were certain central resources. I had been the director of the CIA. I had run a big piece of the American security operation in the region. And we knew that the capacity to continue to understand what was going on there in a way that could prevent the conflict from spiraling to us here at home or American interests abroad mattered an awful lot. They rejected those central understandings, and we find ourselves today in an incredibly difficult place. I hope you all will pray for the president to make good decisions and to be bold. We have thousands of Americans that are still stuck there, most of whom do want to come back to the United States. I pray that they get this right, that he gives the military the rules of engagement they need to execute that important mission, that we don't have another bad day like we had on August 26th, and that we all pray for the men who are there today working to deliver on what President Biden has laid out for them. That he has given them an incredibly difficult mission, perhaps even impossible. I hope that they're able to execute this in a way that protects and preserves the most important American interests. And I'm sure Mary and I will get to talk about this more. I joked a little bit about being an unemployed former diplomat. That is true. I'm spending my time now working on the very mission you all came together here in this beautiful place for this weekend. Susan and I, when I learned that the election wasn't going to quite go our way, Susan and I asked ourselves a question I get from lots of folks. What can I do? How, from wherever I am, I was no longer going to have this capacity to work on behalf of America as its Secretary of State. What can we do? I created an organization, we called it CavPac. That's just a nod to my days as a young cavalry soldier. But its mission is pretty clear. Its mission is to talk about freedom and ride to the sound of the guns and be fearless and never give an inch in this conservative fight that you all are working on. And so I now travel the country, helping candidates raise money, helping them get organized. I joked with someone tonight that when I came to Congress in 2010, it was the last time we threw Nancy Pelosi out. Who would have believed I'd have to do it again? I hope you all will join me in this fight. I met some Californians, I blame you. I talked a moment ago about the connection between the challenges abroad and the ones at home. Think about just these simple ideas. So we're about to spend $5 trillion a year money. That $5 trillion is going to go to mostly ephemeral projects, much of which will be squandered. Those resources will not be available to protect and secure American freedoms. It is almost a certainty, if that is passed, that not only will our defense budget shrink, but the money that's provided to our law enforcement officers across America will necessarily shrink too. There's a connectivity. You should know that the liberals understand that deeply. If we ban fossil fuels, you'll take away one of the central tools that I had as America's Secretary of State. I cannot tell you how few times I had a meeting with a world leader, a prime minister, a president, my counterpart, a foreign minister. I can't tell you how few times it was that energy wasn't at the very center of part of our discussion. They all needed to electrify their countries. They needed to provide electricity for their citizens. And they knew that they weren't going to do it with solar panels and waterfalls. We're about to take that away. We're about to start begging the Saudis and the Russians to deliver energy to us here at home. This is just crazy on stilts. These domestic decisions have important national security implications. If we abandon race neutrality and punish the so-called oppressor classes, it follows with certainty that our excellence will diminish and our capacity to fight for these conservative ideas that you all are here talking about this weekend, our capacity to make the rational arguments, the reasoned arguments, the intellectual arguments that will defend and secure our freedoms here at home. We knew this too. We knew that if we executed a foreign policy based on wishful thinking, you'd end up in places just like we are in Kabul today. We were hard-nosed realists. We made sure that we only defended those things that were most important to the United States of America. Mary and I will talk about that. But we also knew that we had this fundamental responsibility to talk about America around the world in a way that was fundamentally different. Jennifer, you talked about the Commission on Inalienable Rights. I had, as a young cadet, I'd had this chance to study what it meant to protect life. But I was being asked as a young soldier to prepare to go to the battlefield and be prepared to kill those that were attacking our country. There are deep philosophical implications to this. And so I had been thinking about this for some time, and when I became Secretary of State, I watched our diplomats around the world talk about human rights. We all talk about the fact that, boy, America is an enormous force for good in the world, and we talk about human rights. I have to tell you, your State Department goes around the world talking about human rights that our founders would not recognize. Moreover, each of them had their own sense of what human rights should encompass. You need not go very far to see the big fights that take place when one begins to assault this. But we did. We put together this commission. I admit it was just a bit stacked. I'm sure some judge will use that quote in a litigation one day. But it wasn't stacked politically. It was stacked with people who believed in the United States of America, who understood that property rights, our founders knew they mattered, that the ability to contract mattered, that the fact that we understood that these rights came from our Creator mattered. And I wanted my diplomats around the world to be regrounded in this central understanding. And so you can go read it. Actually, it's not as easy as it used to be. You can still find it. This State Department under my successor has now buried this. I give you an hour to find it on the State Department website. But we talked about the American tradition. We talked about the American founding. I wanted my diplomats around the world to know that when they spoke to their counterparts around the world, that those nations would have a different understanding, that their nations had a separate founding from ours, but that our vision had created the most exceptional nation in the history of civilization. And so we walked it back. I put out a cable and said, when we talk about human rights, these are the things we're going to talk about. It promptly launched about 200 lawsuits. My wife would tell you we have lawyers all over the place. I don't know how many of them are still going on. But we were right. We were right in regrounding our foreign policy in these most central understandings of our nation, because when we do that, we're strong around the world. I'll never forget, I was giving a speech in Cairo. I had when I became Secretary of State, even during my confirmation, I knew I'd wanted to do this. You'll recall President Obama goes to Cairo and goes on what he calls his apology tour. Anybody remember? Yeah. It stuck in my craw too. So I decided I was going to go to Cairo and tell the other side of that story. So we began to write. By the way, I told the team, I said, I want to go stand on the same square. He'd given it from a place called Al-Azhar University, a very important place in Islam and Islamic education. I wanted to go stand on the exact same place they did. And about 2 weeks later, my team came back in and said, sir, you can't do that. And I said, why is that? And they said, sir, we don't think we can provide security there. And I said, the President of the United States went there. He stood there. They said, yeah, they liked him. The truth is they liked us too. And if they didn't like us, I can assure you they respected us. In this set of remarks, I began them. I took the first pen and I drafted the very first sentence that said, we ended up giving it in Cairo at a different place, but the first sentence said, I'm an evangelical Christian. And of course it goes to speechwriting, it comes back, that sentence is gone. Absolutely gone. That's fine. I put it back in, sent it back down. Second time it comes back up, sentence is gone again. I asked my senior speechwriter to come up, a great kid named David Willazal, great speechwriter, Christian young man. He comes up and he says, I said, David, why do you keep taking this out? He says, well, I think you'll actually lose some of the audience. The audience was surely to be almost all Muslim. He says, I think you'll lose some of the audience. And I told him I wanted to talk about that because I believed that in the end, these people would respect discipline and faith and those who were prepared to defend the things that they were asked by their creator or their country to defend. Fascinating. To this day, now, goodness, several years on from when I gave this set of remarks, I get notes about that line from that speech more than any other remarks I made in my entire time. It was important. These comments almost always come from Muslim leaders. It was important to them. They could see that when I spoke to them, I wasn't going to be telling them some story they wanted to hear, and that I wasn't going to speak from cowardice, but I was going to speak about the things that mattered to America. And we could have a frank conversation, and we would often disagree, but we were going to talk in a serious and thoughtful way about the things we believed and why we believed in them, why we were prepared to defend them, and how we could deliver on behalf of each of our nations in a way that was spectacular and beneficial not only to our country, but to theirs. I'll end with this thought, and then Mary and I can get after it. It's really important that we do this in a way that is fearless. That's why I'm so happy to see such a big group here tonight. When I became the CI director, I knew I had a big challenge in front of me. I'd been on the Intelligence Committee. I'd been on the Benghazi Committee. I had worked with some folks from the CIA. But you never really know an institution like that till you're in it. But I knew this. I knew I was following this guy named John Brennan. Hey. Go ahead and boo. I booed too. Yeah. Look, Director Brennan had a very different take on America than President Trump and I had. And he had a very different take on the importance of taking risk and sending your intelligence operators around the world to deliver the most crystal clear intelligence that you can possibly get for decision makers. So when I came in, I knew too that the people that were running the big important institutions there inside the CIA, they'd be Brennan's guys. I wanted Mike's guys. But I didn't know the organization well enough to get Mike's guys there. So I had a chief of staff. His name's Brian. Brian now runs the paramilitary operations for the Central Intelligence Agency. Brian is a former special operator in the military. My wife reminds me Brian is also model good looking. But Brian and I began to evaluate people. So we were reading resumes, reading histories. We were taking it on board. We were looking for people outside the organization who just retired. We were going to build a team of people that could deliver for America. And so we would work on this, and I'd read, and then I'd bring Brian in, and Brian knew so many of the people, and he would say to me, I'd say, what do you think about Pete? And he'd say, Pete's a pipe hitter. What did he mean by pipe hitter, right? This is a phrase that he would come to use often. He meant someone who was fearless, who wasn't going to let a speed bump look like a mountain, who was going to continue to take on work, and who was fearless in executing the mission that they were assigned. And so for months, as we built the team out, it became shorthand. I'd say, what do you think about Sally? Not a pipe hitter. This is an important concept. You all have a leader here at the Steamboat Institute, Jennifer. You're a pipe hitter, Jennifer. Yeah. Each of you has a place. As I've done these events across the country helping candidates, I have seen so many amazing American pipe hitters. I've seen women in their 70s tell me they hadn't been to a PTA meeting in 40 years and they're not going to miss one. I've seen people who said, you know, Mike, I literally didn't even know we had a county commission, and I'm now going to win a county commission seat. People running for school board, people helping candidates be elected to these offices that matter so much to America, and the very ideas that the Steamboat Institute puts forward. These are pipe hitters. These are people who are never going to give an inch. They're going to do it with a smile, they're going to be gracious, and they're going to crush it. I hope each of you will continue the work that you're doing this weekend and find places in your own community, in your own life, where you can go out and be a pipe hitter. You should know, I got up every day and read intelligence. It was the darkest hour of my life every day. There was not much good news in any of those books, but it gave me the intellectual capacity to think about how to begin to solve these problems. And in spite of every one of those challenges, everything I saw for those 4 years, where I had this incredible privilege to serve in these 2 jobs, in spite of all the challenges, I have to tell you, I'm incredibly long on America. That's a financial term. It means that if you were going to place any money on any one nation, there is no place to put it like the United States of America. This is a nation that's going to prevail. This is a nation that is going to reclaim its freedom. And I'm counting on everyone who's here tonight to be a part of that. Grab your family members. When somebody tells you in your community they don't do politics, remind them that politics does them. And make sure that they grab a hold of it and they help you. And they help you build out and reclaim the freedoms that America was built on. I know we're going to do it. As I look at these faces here tonight, I am even more confident of that. Thank you all so much. I look forward to taking your questions and to having a great conversation this evening. Thank you all so much. Need a hand? There you go. Thank you. Need a hand? Thank you all.
Great. Thank you,
I can help
Kelly.
you with that.
Thank you.
All right.
All righty.
Mary.
Excellent. Can everybody hear me out there? Great. Can we give him one more round of applause, please? I mean, come on. That was great. Thank you. Hello, sir. It's great to be with you again.
Great to be back with you, Mary.
Just so that everybody knows, the secretary didn't tell me what he was going to say tonight, so I am on the hook now just as much as you are. Please send me your questions, and I'm going to try to get as many of your questions in as I do mine, and we'll try to get as many in as possible. So, Mr. Secretary, you started your remarks and you said, I get asked all of these questions, and here are the 4 questions that I'm usually asked, but you know what, sir, I think you missed one.
Are you going to run for president?
Yeah. So there's questions I'm going to answer tonight. And then there's that question.
Okay.
No, I'll be straight up. No one knows. Susan and I are thinking, we're praying, we're trying to get it right. We're gonna go make sure that 2022 is just a blowout for the conservative freedom lovers, and then we'll turn to other things.
Okay. Well, there's an entire world to talk about, and there's a lot to talk about in America today. But I would like to start with Afghanistan, given what we've all just witnessed. Much of the commentary talks about Afghanistan as if it's in isolation, that we're going to have a terror threat from Afghanistan reappear. And yet when you were in Congress, you made your name by uncovering the secret side deals with Iran. And you made a very interesting speech in January about terrorism in Iran. So how do you think about that threat, and how should we think about this threat in our daily lives?
So this is an important question. So it is not possible. We see what's going on in Afghanistan today. It is not possible to think about this alone, and we didn't in the administration. We were focused on how do you apply the resource set across the world. So we think of Al-Qaeda being in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda's biggest operation by far is not in Afghanistan today. It's in a place called Yemen. Its second biggest operation isn't in Afghanistan. It's Al-Shabaab operating in Africa. Moreover, the operational leaders, the people who are directing terror operations for Al-Qaeda today, are no longer in Afghanistan. We chased them out of there. They're sitting in Tehran. And indeed, this is now public. The CIA killed Al-Qaeda's number 2 in Tehran not too terribly long ago. So, yeah, it was a hell of a mission. It was remarkable. We have to make sure that we focus on the things that present real risk. And Afghanistan is certainly among those places. But I must say, this long predates me or the Trump administration. Our capacity to understand terror threats around the world over these last 90 years is off the charts better today than it was on 9/10 of 2001. We've gotten really good at this. To conduct a full-scale, large terror plot in the United States today is not an easy task. And there are lots of people trying, even as we're sitting there. But the capacity to disrupt, the capacity to see, our international partners, our Israeli friends, all of whom have developed a very robust counterterrorism capacity. The thing that, frankly, if to isolate on Afghanistan for a moment, the thing that worries me the most is that we will lose our antenna there. We will lose our capacity to see the things that we have been able to see in Afghanistan.
So is it true that we'll have over-the-horizon capacity to kill terrorists in Afghanistan after this withdrawal?
Yeah, I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know what they're leaving behind. The truth is, we had a plan for how we thought we could continue to. I always talk about it not as eliminate risk, as reduce risk from there. We had a plan for how we were going to do it, what we were going to leave behind, how we were going to execute that mission. I've seen no evidence that they're following that plan, but I pray that they are at least thinking about how we will continue to be able to see Tora Bora, the caves in the northeast, see what they're doing on the Pakistani side of the Afghan border as well.
Question from the audience. Thank you very much. Please keep sending them. How to respond to those who say Trump made a deal with the Taliban and therefore Biden had no choice?
Yes, the famous Trump-Taliban deal. It's actually the Pompeo-Taliban deal. I was there. It's pronounced Doha, not Daho. Look, the president gave a very clear set of instructions to us. Do your best to build out peace and reconciliation. We did that. We got a document signed. It was signed on February 29th, 2020. It laid out a set of conditions, a set of things that the United States would do, a set of things that we expected the Taliban to do. We made very clear, as did the president in his own inimical way, that if they violated that set of understandings or they didn't meet the conditions, we certainly wouldn't meet ours and we would bring real American power against them. It happened no less than half a dozen times. They would move in a particular place that they weren't supposed to move, and I would give guidance to General Scotty Miller, who was the commander of forces in Afghanistan, and we would let the Taliban know, usually with F-16s, that we weren't happy. And what it achieved was, and what the Biden administration missed in that, was that they forgot that our withdrawal had to be conditions-based. I spoke about this. The president wanted everyone out of there, but we could never get the conditions right. Right? We weren't able to achieve that. And so when we left on January 20th at noon, we had control. We hadn't had an American killed since February 29th of 2020. We hadn't even had an attack on Americans. And when the Taliban had violated the conditions that we had laid down, we imposed cost. This is pretty basic. You all, right? Peace through strength, Ronald Reagan. Right? This wasn't rocket science. This was, you violated agreement, there's a price to pay for that. And we developed a set of understandings on the ground, not words on a piece of paper. Nobody bought the piece of paper as the importance other than laying down the deterrence model. And it gave us the backdrop against which to hold the Taliban accountable for their failure to execute against what they had promised. And so they'd made a promise in the agreement. They made a promise they'd bust with Al-Qaeda, that they would break with Al-Qaeda. That's clearly not the case. So we always knew that we had real work to do. I think the agreement was important because it gave us the framework where we could reduce our force posture and still deliver what goes for stability in Afghanistan.
We had another question from the audience, which ties back to your Commission on Inalienable Rights and some of the other remarks that you've made. And that is, what happens to the women of Afghanistan? And I know that one of the things that we struggled with was this idea that things are very black and white, right? And you can have certain expectations for what you can build somewhere else, but not all democracies are the same, and not all cultural traditions are the same. Yeah. You know, this is tough for America. It's horrible to see the treatment of women. How do you think about that? I mean, how do we think about human rights in a place like that?
Look, these questions where societies oppress minorities are some of the most difficult we face. If you ask the question about what's going to happen to the women of Afghanistan, they're going to live in a very difficult set of conditions. I mean, as a factual matter, life is going to regress for the women who were in the non-Taliban controlled parts of Afghanistan. That is near certainty. The question is, how does America do its best wherever we find those problem sets? So we can't just focus on Afghanistan. Mary, you and I worked hard on this problem set. We saw what was happening to religious minorities in China. The single worst human rights violations that I can imagine since the 1930s in Germany. And I don't talk about that lightly. 1 million people, the unclassified number, the number's significantly more than that, being held in internment camps, forced sterilizations, families torn apart, held in prisons. This is the Chinese Communist Party doing what communists do everywhere in the world. And so we did our best. I made the declaration. It took me till the last 24 hours of the administration to do so, but made the declaration that this was in fact genocide. That's only happened just a handful of times in American history that we've declared genocide was taking place, but it was true. It was all part of the American understanding. It was all part of the American understanding of how we use the American capacity and our power to do our best to both secure freedom for Americans and try to make life better for people all across the world.
Well, let's turn to communist China, because this was one of your most significant focuses in your time, both as CIA director and as Secretary of State. Can you talk a little bit about the breadth of the problem, the complexity of it, why it's different than what we faced during the Cold War with the Soviets?
Yeah. So I talked about the greatest threat to the Republic being the American educational establishment. The greatest external threat to the United States is not a remotely close call. It's not radical Islamic terrorism. It's not Vladimir Putin. Those are problematic. Our southern border is a wreck. The Chinese Communist Party far and away presents the single threat that can take our republic down over the next 5, 10, 20 years. It's not, in my judgment, something one should even debate about the most serious threat. Why? My young days as a cadet taught me there's two things you have to worry about with an adversary: will and capacity. 1.4 billion people had more missile tests last year than the entire rest of the world combined, a capable nuclear force, a massive campaign right here inside the United States through the United Front Department to try to destroy our republic from within, a very capable commercial sector with AI that rivals American technology, the capacity to put semiconductors in places that you can't imagine. Each of these things is a scope and scale that there's no other threat can pose to the United States of America. That goes to capacity. Now to intent. You just have to listen to Xi Jinping. There's no doubt what this fellow wants. He talks about the Middle Kingdom and the China Dream. Well, the China Dream is global dominance, and the Middle Kingdom can't be the middle of something unless you own the rest of it. And he is unambiguous about this. Talked for years about the Chinese would say, we're gonna hide our strength and bide our time. Those days are over. They are now showing their strength and using time to crush Western civilization. So we for the first time, no administration was prepared to take this on. By the way, this is not Republican or Democrat. No Republican president or Democrat president before was prepared to confront this, because it's a more complex problem than when I was a young soldier in the Cold War, right? I was on the East German border taking down the Soviet Union with my little M1 tank.
It's
right.
not a little tank, by the way.
Yeah, I mean,
Just FYI.
Just as I was a fly speck in the amazing work that Ronald Reagan did. The Chinese Communist Party presents a bigger challenge because they are massively influential on most of America's major institutions. Our financial institutions, our media institutions, Hollywood, that puts so much information out in the space. The Chinese Communist Party is working diligently against those problem sets every day. The Soviet Union never dreamed of doing those things. One last thought. This is how granular it gets. You should know that the Chinese Communist Party almost certainly has someone at every county commission meeting in the state of Colorado at least once a year. I gave a speech, Mary will remember this. I'd seen that the National Governors Association was coming to Washington, and I called the head of it. It was Governor Merrill Larry Hogan at the time, and I picked up the phone and said, "Hey, I want to come talk to you." And he said, "Hey, we got a busy schedule. The Secretary of State, what the heck do you want to come talk to the governors for?" And I said, "I want to come talk about China." And I think he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Fine, you can have 20 minutes on Saturday afternoon." So on a Saturday afternoon, I had managed to get declassified a document, and I was standing in front of the governors, and they were about half paying attention to this crazy Secretary of State. And then I told them, I said, "I have this document, and it's a Chinese document, and what the Chinese Communist Party has done is they've graded every governor, whether you are friendly, foe, or we're working on you." You can't imagine. Everyone would pick up their cell phone. They are texting their chief of staff saying, "I need a copy. I need a copy." Think about this. The Chinese Communist Party is working on every governor in the United States of America to make them a friend of China instead of an advocate for the United States of America. This problem is deep and complex and worthy of focus in a bipartisan way of the real challenge that's going to preserve our freedom for the next 245 years.
You said it's not a partisan issue. Do you believe the Biden administration will be as strong on communist China as you and President Trump were?
I'm trying to be diplomatic because that's what I did.
You're retired, sir.
For a couple of years. No, look, they're almost certain not to be. Their language has been okay so far. It's kind of mixed, but their actions have been terrible, right? I mean, our Secretary of State went and had the Chinese Communist Party talk to them about Black Lives Matter and sat there and listened to it. I'm pretty sure that would have gone differently. But more important even than that, more important, right? Just the other day, the decision went little noticed. We attacked a company called Huawei. We had them nearly taken down. They've infiltrated the world with their technology. We worked and worked and worked across the world. This administration went back and gave them the capacity to purchase semiconductors that they so desperately need. We had them blacklisted. No, I don't think this administration will take it as seriously, but I always hope. There are Democrats who get this threat too, and there are Republicans who do not. And boy, when Wall Street's giving you a bunch of money, they are deeply embedded in this system.
Another question from the audience. Why are we not talking about the appeasement of the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Yeah, because it's crowded. This administration gave within a couple months, let me back up. Let me start from the beginning, because I want to give you the context for this. You talked about Afghanistan not being in isolation. You can't talk about Iran in isolation either. The way that I proposed to President Trump that we think about the Middle East was holistically. We knew two things for sure. We knew that we had a friend and an ally in Israel, and we knew that the world's largest state sponsor of terror was Iran, and we should treat each of them accordingly. We'd taken over from an administration that had it just reversed. They'd made life very difficult for the relationship between the United States and Israel, and they had appeased the Iranians. We flipped the script in so many ways, right? So the most famous, of course, is that we move our U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. A great story for a president who, but we recognize the Golan Heights. We were realists, right? Like the Israelis own the Golan Heights. We should just say so. I can't imagine how controversial. I was the first Secretary of State to ever go to the West Bank, to Judea and Samaria. How controversial can that be, right? You wouldn't imagine the howls that we received for that. But it was because we wanted to support this democracy, the one place that the three major religions in the world in the Middle East can all worship. It's remarkable, friend. We knew Iran was bad. We broke out of the silly nuclear deal that they had entered into and then imposed these remarkable sanctions on the regime. We had taken the regime down from $123 billion in foreign exchange to about $4 billion. We needed more time. This administration, within months, turned around and released $7 billion to Ibrahim Raisi, the new leader in Iran. It is sickening to think that the Iranians will now have $7 billion more money to go conduct terror. It shouldn't surprise anyone that within a handful of weeks of this administration, the Iranians were launching rockets into Israel from the Gaza Strip. The last piece of our understanding of the Middle East was one that said, for 40 years we'd sent secretaries of state. My normal role in the Middle East would be to fly to Israel and then fly to Ramallah in the West Bank and go back and forth and negotiate over lines on the map. Smarter secretaries of state than me had failed at this. So we just decided we weren't going to do that. We decided we were happy to make life better for the Palestinians, but we weren't going to let that conflict stand in the way of Middle East peace. And so over time, we worked and worked and worked, and we had the right leadership set. We had good leaders in Israel with Prime Minister Netanyahu and a very unique president in the United States, and Mohammed bin Zayed in the United Arabs, a crown prince in Bahrain, who understood that that this was a new time, and that having Israel as the nation you wanted to wipe off the face of the earth wasn't good foreign policy. And so we were able to create these amazing agreements that will change the course of history in the Middle East. I am confident more nations will sign up, but it'll take American leadership to help them get there. There were a number of things that we had to provide those Arab leaders the assurances they needed to make sure that they were in a good place. And we were able to do that. It will be one of the most lasting achievements. I don't think this administration can screw it up, but one never knows. But I think because the people of those countries will come to see that their lives are better because of these accords, because of these agreements, I think these will be lasting changes in those countries.
Yes, thank you. We should clap to that too. I think another interesting part of your time as Secretary of State is that you reached out and paid attention to parts of the world that we never really hear about or think about. You went to the Arctic and you engaged with the Arctic Council. You spent an enormous amount of time in Central and South America. Can you speak a little bit about places that we don't hear about? We so often hear about China, Russia, Iran, Afghanistan, but should we be thinking about those parts of the world too? Those hidden corners that create danger or risk for us and our people?
So I had a boss that let me go take on some things that probably previous secretaries of state couldn't. So you'll remember when the president tweeted that we were going to buy Greenland? Yes, I remember it too. I'll never forget the call that I got from, anyway. So, it's a real estate deal. We weren't able to, we never got the money into escrow. In any event, it was the kind of thinking that we were able to do. We were able to go try to tackle some problems. We could see the Chinese and the Russians working up in the Arctic, so we began to try and take the European countries who, for them, it was all about climate change when it came to the Arctic. We took a different approach. We took an approach that said this is a very serious national security issue. You should know that important missile bases lie inside the Arctic Circle for lots of countries. We wanted to make sure that our Canadian friends and our great perch from Alaska all had the capacity to do what they needed to do. We worked on problems. I went to Mexico more than just about any Secretary of State in a long time, not just to solve the border issues. I was happy to see the Supreme Court's decision to reinstate remain in Mexico. It was one of my most fascinating conversations. I had a boss who gave me all the tools I needed to convince the Mexican government that they should let us do that. But we also have, for the first time in our lives, ungoverned space, right? We talk about Afghanistan being ungoverned space. We have ungoverned space that's not 6,000 miles away from us any longer. We have it on our southern border. And so we were working in the administration to think about what that means to have that ungoverned space there, right? Jihadis like to flow to these spaces. Terrorists like to flow. Their cartels are already there. The difference between a cartel and a jihadi organization is a little bit of faith and a little bit of money. They pose real risk to the United States as well, and they are not 6,000 miles away. And so we had begun to develop a strategy that we didn't quite get across the finish line to think about what it means to have that risk of having uncontrolled non-state space on one's border. So we were able to take these on. We also got to work on religious freedom in the way that no administration had been able to do before. It was something that meant a lot to me, not only because I just think this is the most important right that each of us possess, the capacity to worship our faith in the way that we choose, or not to, if we choose that as well. And so many people across the world don't. But there's also deep national security implications. Nations that have religious freedom are less likely to go to war and present risk to the United States of America. And so we built out an enormous platform. We created these things called religious freedom ministerials, a fancy name for bringing people of every faith to the State Department to talk and to fellowship and to think about expanding the scope for every human being to be able to practice their faith. They were the largest human rights events ever held at the State Department. And we made progress in certain places. We weren't able to make it in others, but working on that problem set, I think, emboldened people all across the world to demand their freedoms and to demand that they be able to practice their faiths too.
You know, we haven't mentioned Europe at all. Does Europe matter?
Oh, yes, of course. Europe matters. Yes.
But you looked at Europe realistically. Sorry. Well, yeah. You could have talked to me before the event.
I'm trying to think about where to begin. So one of the most remarkable speeches that I gave wasn't remarkable for what I said, but was from the audience response. As a brand new Secretary of State, and I gave a speech. Mary will remember this well. I gave a speech to, I think it was the Marshall Fund.
I remember it because the team actually didn't sleep at all that night.
Because we kept reworking it.
We saw the bed, but we never actually got in the bed.
Yeah, because we kept reworking it because we knew what we were in for.
I will never forget that.
Suffice it to say, when I walked off the stage, not so much as a golf clap. And all we had done in this speech was demand that Europe understand Western civilization and its value. We'd simply asked them to say, hard work matters. We're not going to sacrifice sovereignty. You need to step up as part of your function in NATO. Things that had been taken for granted in the post-World War II order that had just been allowed to slip away for so many decades, and we frankly had just called them out on it. And so I remember I walked back in, and normally the team says, "Oh, great speech, boss. That was wonderful. You were awesome." That day they're like, "Hey, I can't believe you gave that speech, sir." Europe does matter, right? These are the great democracies. These are the big economies. But I'm afraid that we're becoming more like Europe than Europe is becoming like us, where work is less valued, where there is more government-centric focus, where we're not prepared to defend these most basic set of rights that each of us should demand. I pray that Europe can get it back. I was just there this past week, and I must say, I was mostly with business leaders there on this trip, and they're worried about their place as well.
And that's a good place and a good time to bring it back home here to the United States. As you travel around, and as you talk to groups, great groups like the Steamboat Institute, and you do your work with CAVPAC, do you see or sense or feel in your soul a new Tea Party movement building in America?
Yeah. There's definitely something going on. I think people are beginning to sense, and you have to be careful when you say people.
Right.
It's a bit of a dodge. But I think I see more serious reflection on the things we all know have to be done to preserve this republic than I had seen for an awfully long time. I came in as part of that Tea Party class in 2010. It was crazy. Some of the folks who came in as part of that class walked away from those commitments too. I regret that. But I do see that same energy today. I see people thinking more seriously about what is at risk. For folks like me who are a little bit older, maybe not so much the risk for themselves, but the risk for their kids and their grandkids. And so I am incredibly optimistic about that, because I think this movement's beginning to coalesce. It is a conservative set of ideas that I think are beginning to take hold in broader swaths, although not yet in our colleges and schools. But I am hopeful that one day we will reclaim those high grounds as well.
One last question, and I might take the moderator privilege with this one. I saw you in so many difficult circumstances, both at the State Department, but in your meetings around the world, in your efforts to keep Americans safe, which I know that you thought about every single day, all day and all night. How did you maintain, and how do you maintain, where did this faith and this deep love for America come from with you?
Oh, it's almost an unanswerable question.
Because it's unswerving.
Look, this nation has given me so much, and I saw that. I mean, I was this kid. I got this chance to go to West Point. I mean, who'd have thunk it, right? Mm-hmm. And I got a chance to serve, and I could stare across the fence at East German communists. I mean, how much fun is that? But I also got a chance to see when I was that young soldier. I left Germany in October of '89, just literally a couple of weeks before the fence came down in East Germany and the wall came down in Berlin. I'll never forget this moment. It all came down, and so I think, they had to get me out of the country before it happened, right? Because it was, I caused this. But I called one of my buddies, another lieutenant back there, and we'd literally been patrolling this border for decades, and he and I for the last 2.5 years. And he said, Mike, today we're running traffic control points, right? So there's these roads that were the historic roads between what was then East and West Germany. And he said, Mike, now we are managing the traffic flow, cars everywhere. And he said, but Mike, traffic's only going one way. It's going towards freedom.
Wow.
Right? The singular flow. Those families in East Germany knew that wall might go back up tomorrow, and they wanted to be on the western side of that. And so I think as a Christian, I understand our founding as a Judeo-Christian one, and one that is unique among nations. And then I know what this country has given to me, and that I still have this enormous debt to it as well. And so this is a fight worth continuing to stay in. And I don't know from exactly what perch, but I promise you all I will continue to stay in the fight in some place, in some way, and that I am counting on each of you to do that as well. So thank you for being here.
Please join me in
God bless
applause
you all.
for the Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.